Welcome to WeLearn Virtual Learning Network. This is session number 16, New Economic Policy. The topics which we will cover in this session are Introduction about New Economic Policy, Need for New Economic Policy, Nature and Scope of New Policy, Progress and problem in the implementation of new economic policy, and an assessment of new economic policy. Coming towards the first topic, that is the introduction of new economic policy. In earlier policies of public sector expansion created an inefficient public sector which incurred losses. A system of licensing and control resulted in inhibiting investment by private sector and also discouraging foreign investment into the country. Thus, there was a need to review the economic policies followed during the first 3 decades of development with a view to improve growth and efficiency. As a result of this, the government initiated the economic policy. Coming towards the next topic, that is the need for economic policy. The economic policy initiated under the leadership of late Prime Minister Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru has provided, number 1, the big role of the public sector in the entertainment of heavy and basic industries. Number 2, the expansion of the role of state via public sector for the erection of hydroelectric power projects, irrigation dams, roads and communications. Number 3, the expansion of the role in the creation of social infrastructure such as school, colleges, universities, technical and engineering institutes, case of establishment of primary health centers, hospitals and medical institutions to train doctors, nurses and other supporting staff. Although the rest of economy was left open for the private sector, a system regulation and control has introduced. This leads to the establishment of license and permit Raj. Both the bureaucrats and the politicians began to thrive on the basis of licensing system. There is no doubt that the economic development promotes under the leadership of the state did result in the creation of industrial base in the form of heavy and basic industry. It did help to create infrastructure in the form of roads, railways, communication, irrigation and hydroelectric work, thermal power generation plants, and it did help in expanding educational and health facilities. At the same time, it also created certain problems. They were: the expansion of the private sector investment was inhibited by the excessive controls and licensing policy. Number 2, public sector investment yielded poor rate of return. Public sector was plagued by inefficiency and bureaucratic rules and procedures. Public sector enjoyed monopoly in all areas which were reserved for it. The denial of competitive private sector units did not create reduction in the cost. Next is, private sector investment in big projects could not be undertaken by the large industrial and business houses on account of MRTP Act. The foreign investment also got discouraged due to extensive of very intricate license and other regulations. Next topic is the nature and scope of new economic policy. The nature of new economic policy lies in the opening of private sector. It also implied an encouragement of the private sector by dismantling the system of license and control. The nature of new economic policy necessitated four kinds of changes. They are liberalization, reform of the public sector, privatization, and globalization. So coming towards the first, that is liberalization. The main aim of liberalization was to remove uncertainty, shackles on freedom of setting up of enterprises. The country during the first 3 decades of development has created a license permit Raj, the rule of the bureaucracy to grant a license to start an undertaking. If the business houses intended to set up a new enterprise, their applications were sent for the scrutiny of MRTP Act prescribed. The government through it describes that the limit should be abolished so that private sector could establish big projects in the core sector, that is heavy industry, infrastructure, pharmaceuticals, etc. The government considered the ceiling limit as irrelevant and a hindrance to investment in the context of new wave of liberalization. The industrial policy of 1991 abolished industrial license for all projects except a small list of 18 industries. 3 major items, which are motor cars, white goods, raw hides and skins, and patient leather, were also removed from the list of reserved items. To meet this demand, the government decided to abolish licensing in these commodities. Similarly, raw hides and skins and patient leather, which are inputs in the production of shoe, which have a large export demand, have to enable firm to set up the new units to expand existing units. The government decided to abolish licensing in this area, also being freed from licensing. Now, coming towards the reforms of the public sector. The reforms has undertaken several measures with respect to the public sector. The major measures are: number 1, the area of public sector will be restricted to strategic high-tech and essential infrastructure. Number 2, public sector enterprise which are chronically sick will be referred to Board for Industrial and Financial Recommendations, that is BIFR. Number 3, to improve efficiency and think the interest of workers. A part of the share will be offered to the workers. Next is to raise resources for public sector units. The public sector management will be permitted to take the help of natural funds and other financial institutions by offering them a share of ownership. Coming towards the next, that is the privatization. Privatization is the process by which the ownership of a public sector unit is transferred to the private sector. when 100% ownership is transferred, it is the case of decentralization. When less than 100% or more than 50% ownership is transferred, it is the case of partial privatization with private sector majority ownership of shares. When less than 50% ownership is transferred, but it is more than 24%, it is the case of partial privatization. But when the government disinvests its share to the extent to 5 to 10% to meet the deflects in the budget, this is called as the defect privatization. Coming towards the last point, that is the globalization. Globalization refers to the process of opening up of economy to the rest of the world economy so that a free flow of goods and services, technology and investment can take place. It has 4 components. Number 1, reduction of trade barriers so as to permit free flow of goods and services across the border. Number 2, creation of an environment in which free flow of capital can take place. Number 3, creation of an environment in which free flow of technology can take place. And the last is creation of an environment in which free flow of labor can take place. Next topic is progress and problem in the implementation of new economic policy. So first is liberalization of the economy. The government has liberalized the regulatory framework by abolishing license in all industries except 15 industries. This has provided enough freedom of enterprise. The private investors now need not run after bureaucrats in various industries to seek clearance for setting up new units or to execute plans of expansion of existing capacity or undertaking the production of new products in the same industry. Next is reforms of the public sector. This has been undertaken till a taken in a systematic manner and number of steps have been taken. These steps are: overstaffing of public sector is being progressively reduced. Number 2, to help the workers affected by NEP, the government set up of National Renewal Fund to provide compensation for voluntary retirement. Number 3, the government referred 53 PSUs which were chronically sick to the BIFR up to March 1995. The government has undertaken disinvestment for private sector units to the extent of 5 to 20%. Next is the program of privatization. Whenever the government indicated its intention to privatize the public sector units, there was strong resistance by trade. Even the bureaucrats who consider public sector unit as their colonies have been silently working against privatization. Next is globalization of the economy. To strengthen the globalization of the economy, the government has undertaken a number of measures. These are reduction of import duties, fall in the external value of the rupee. Next is NEP and India's foreign exchange reserves, and the last is foreign investment flows into India. The next topic is an assessment of new economic policy. So coming towards the first, as a result of the new economic policy, gradually the growth of the economy, which had surpassed a low level of 0.8% of GDP in 1991-92, has slowly recovered, and during last 3 years it has averaged 8% of GDP, which is a record achievement. Second is NEP, by throwing the challenge of privatization to the public sector undertaking, has taken them out of their slumber, and this fear has instilled a vigorous effort to improve the performance of public sector undertakings. Next is NEP has been able to arrest the inflationary trend of wholesale price. The index of wholesale price, which rose by 13.7%, declined to 4.4%. This is a healthy development. Next is, that is the fourth, is the index of industrial production has also shown an overall growth rate from 0.6% to 11.8%. Fifth is growth of exports, which was on a low order of 3.8%, improved to 20.8%, but this has again slowed down to 4.1%. And the last is foreign exchange reserves, which had slumped to a low level of $2.24 billion, have increased to a level of $25.4 billion. So these are the questions which are based on this session. Number 1. List 3 major elements of economic policy followed in the first 3 decades of development. Number 2. What is privatization? List the various forms of privatization. Number 3. List 5 major areas of weakness of NEPs. So these are the questions based on the session. Thank you so much. Happy learning, we learning.